Story 1. I have this traumatic childhood memory that I cannot forget. Sometimes I dream about it, or just think about it late at night when I can't sleep and I'm feeling stressed. It sucks. And I thought maybe about it might help me get over it a little. So, I'm sending this to you today. And when I was a kid, we were always struggling for money. I feel like we moved houses maybe 6 or 7 times. Usually a downgrade to a much cheaper property, even a trailer one time, followed by a big upgrade because my dad never lived within our means. As soon as he had a bit of dough, we started spending it, living in luxury. It was kind of sweet. He wanted to provide for me, my mom, and my baby brother, but he just wasn't good at keeping hold of money. When he had a good job, we'd get takeout food every day, and he'd shower us with toys and mom with gifts. Then we'd lose everything and end up in some dirty trailer park or something, and everyone would be stressed. Dad would never take it out on us, but he'd take it out on himself, smoking and drinking and falling into a stupor. So, it took longer to break out of the rut and find the next job. I never really knew what my father did for work. He didn't have a profession exactly. He took on random jobs and schemes, pretty much. He was always looking for his latest trick, and if I'd try to list or even remember most of them, I'd probably be here all night. One time, he slid out of the back of his car until the law shut him down. Another time, he got a group of parole friends working as home decorators until a client realized that he didn't have the necessary licenses and insurance when one of the guys fell through the roof. It was just things like this all the time. And while he was a fun dad, it also made my childhood incredibly stressful, especially after my baby brother Barton was born and wouldn't stop crying all the time. The specific memory that sticks in my mind happened when we were renting a fairly nice house in the suburbs. I guess Dad's latest scheme had been paying off, because things had been going well for a while, and I was beginning to let myself relax. I remembered the sun was setting, so that it must have been mid-evening when the knock on the door came. I knew my mom and dad were downstairs with Barton, so I was surprised when the knock sounded again and nobody answered. I looked out the window of my bedroom at the front of the house. A guy was standing at the door. He looked up at me, and something about him terrified me. I know it's silly, but in me head, I kind of equate him to that rock-steady character from the Ninja Turtles. You know, that big rhinoceros with a tank top, khaki pants, and big boots. This guy reminded me of him, only human. He had this mullet that looked ex-army, and an earring that kind of glinted in one ear, and tattoos all up his thick, muscled arms. He must have caught sight of me looking at him, because he looked up and kind of scowled at me from under a very thick, ugly I know I'm probably imagining him as more troll-like and terrifying in me mind than he actually was. But I guess that's how childhood traumas kind of get at you, I guess. And I'm going to call him Rocksteady. But he began hammering on the front door. With a very meaty fist, he shouted that he knew we were home. He'd seen someone in the upstairs window. An instant terror and guilt flooded through me. Immediately, I heard footsteps downstairs. Dad going to the front door and Mom coming upstairs. My bedroom door opened just as I heard the front door unlatch. Mom was holding Barton, reassuring me that everything was okay and to come back into the room and play. I ignored her and ran to the window. Dad had stepped outside into the front yard with Rocksteady, and Rocksteady was sizing up Dad, looming over him very menacingly. And my dad wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a buff guy who worked out. He was fairly short, and in my mind, he was fragile. He was always smiling and joking and being silly. And the idea of someone like Rocksteady hurting him seemed like a genuine possibility. Even more so as I watched this guy grab Dad by his shirt and drag him into the street. I started to cry and bang on Thundo, but Mom came and pulled me away and made me play with Barton for a bit, even though inside I was absolutely breaking. After minutes or so, Mom had to use the bathroom, so I darted to the window again. Dad and Rocksteady were in the street. Dad was pacing back and forth, gesturing and talking animatedly in his way, and Rockstar seemed calmer and was leaning up against a muscle car. I watched as Dad and Rockstar shook hands, and then Dad came back into the house. He was all smiles and cheery after that. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "Just a simple misunderstanding. Rocksteady was a guy he worked with, and his paycheck hadn't gone through. But it was all sorted out now, and everything had been squared away." I told my dad that that man reminded me of the Rhino from Ninja Turtles, and he seemed to find that hilarious. I thought Mom was calm and fine too, but in retrospect, she clearly wasn't. I went to bed more relaxed that night. It was around in the morning when I heard the crash. It was coming from downstairs. The sound of wood splintering in the front door being kicked in. I looked out the window in terror to see 3 men coming through our front door, and Rocksteady was taking up the rear. There was commotion from elsewhere, upstairs. Mom and Dad reacting to the break-in, I now know, and then smashing and breaking glass from downstairs, and next screaming and yelling. I could now hear 4 male voices, including my father's, and then my mom screaming. Finally, Barton started crying, adding to the cacophony, and Mom's footsteps came thundering upstairs. I'd already locked me door, and she rattled on it. I asked who it was, and she said it was Mom. She said it was good that I'd locked my door, and to keep it locked and stay there, and she was going to take Barton into their room. She told me not to come out under any circumstances, and that Daddy was fine and not to worry. His friends had just come over, and they were just being loud. Even at my young age, I knew that this was all nonsense, but I told Mom I'd stay put. So, I had to sit there on my bed, listening to the 3 men smash up our things downstairs. Dad was yelling for a while, and then I heard another crash, and his voice stopped. I was crying to myself, these heavy sobs, and I felt like my chest was going to burst and my heart would explode. It felt like the chaos went on forever. Eventually, things fell silent, and I thought I was safe. And suddenly, there was a hammering on my door. The wooden frame shuddered, and screamed. A male voice I didn't recognize called out, telling me to open the door. "I'll just call this one Creep Show." And he called me a little B word, and said that if I was Colin's daughter, Colin was my dad, I was going to suffer. Creepshow started saying all these awful things he was going to do to Method. I don't want to repeat here. Stuff that as a little kid I'd never even heard of before. I was still sobbing, crying, and freaking out. Then I heard a bang from out in the hallway, like someone punching a wall. A voice asked what the Creepshow was talking about, and I recognized the voice as that Rocksteady guy. Creepshow said that Colin's daughter, the little B word, was hiding in here, and he was going to drag her out and show Colin what happened to the daughters of men who don't pay up. Rocksteady absolutely lost it. Hester Ted, screaming at this guy, saying that I was only years old, and what kind of sicko threatens a kid. That they were just here to scare Colin to get what they were owed. But this was way over the line. Creep Show didn't back down and started hurling abuse at Rocksteady. There was a moment of silence, and then suddenly my door came splintering open. A man I didn't even recognize, who I later learned was Creepshow, flew backwards into the room, having just been drop-kicked probably through the door by that Rocksteady guy. And now Rocksteady rushed into the room, grabbed Creepshow from the floor, dragged him up, and threw him out. He looked at me, and the terrifying guy had been so afraid of suddenly melted away, and his face softened. I've never seen someone transform like that before or since. Rocksteady told him he was sorry. He didn't really mean for things to go this way. And then he returned to beating the absolute crap out of Creepshow for daring to threaten a little girl like that. The outcome of the story is truly bizarre. Rocksteady genuinely felt so bad about bringing that kind of person to our house that he even offered to pay Dad for the damage. Dad was a bit bruised and scared, but ultimately okay. He didn't really want to call the cops because, well, whatever he was involved in probably wasn't very legal. Rocksteady and the other guy, who was just some sidekick that I never even saw, promised that they'd take Creepshow away and deal with him. Dad told us later that the three men were some bikers he'd hired to work on a project with him, and something had gone wrong with paying them. Apparently, he made things right with Rocksteady, and after that, Dad went completely straight. I guess it took my life being threatened to finally wake him up. Dad passed away recently, and he lived an honest life. Ever since that day, I have no idea what happened to Rocksteady or that Creepshow guy, and it's not Rocksteady who causes me to wake up at night panicking and scared. It's Creepshow, the things he said to me through that door, the punishments he promised to beat out of me. They're not anything that a year-old girl should ever have to hear. Now, I'm sure Creepshow isn't even alive anymore. When Rocksteady dropped him through my bedroom door, he looked like he must have been in his even then. He'd had to have been over by now. So, I can only hope that he died in pain and misery. But sometimes late at night, I imagine he's still out there walking up the stairs to my bedroom door. And this time, my dad and Rocksteady are no longer around to stop him. Story 2. When I was a teenager, I used to share this as a ghost story. But then something happened in my adult years that made it very real, and somehow a lot scarier than when I thought I'd encountered a spirit. So bear with me to my child mind. This was a paranormal encounter, but it's not, and you'll find out why in the second half. I know you don't often run supernatural stories lately on the channel, so I wanted to assure you up front that this isn't that, even if it seems so at first. When I was a kid, my family lost our house, and we had to downgrade. That's what I was told anyway. But honestly, I love the new house. It was older than our previous zero-lot line house, a row house with 3 floors, a tiny backyard, and an alleyway that ran in between the middle of the houses and then along the back of the. To this day, I insist that this new house was better than our much more valuable house from before. The garden was overgrown, filled with mystery and wonder for a kid like me. There was a broken-down greenhouse that contained all sorts of treasures, and the people next door owned a tortoise thought would sometimes break into our yard. There was a crumbling shed filled with the remnants of the last owners. And next to that, adjacent to the back alley, was a big pile of trash made up of things from our move like mattressescent boxes, but also discarded garden equipment and sort of a bunch of statues and ornaments. All sorts of crazy fun things for an year-old boy like me to mess with. The trash pile in the garden was fenced off from within the garden, and the gate had rusted shut. I could climb over it, but I'd been banned from doing so by my mom and was worried about me falling over the fence and impaling myself on a rake or a garden gnome or something. If I wanted to explore the trash paradise, I had to exit through the front door, walk a few houses down, and then head down the alleyway and around the back off houses where the trash pile had a much more accessible gate. And this is what I was doing on the day this happened. I walked down the long, dark, and honestly a bit scary arcade tunnel leading to the open-air back alley. There was all sorts of old graffiti on the bricks, and not spray paint or tags, but scratches using stones. From the ground, the neighborhood's pass kits had left their mark, and I've always paused to read some of it before continuing on. Janice Bliss, John, forever, Betsy and Evelyn lived here, things like that. I still live in my childhood home to this day, so I see these scribblings regularly. I just read a new one that said something like, Arthur ate his kids, and it put the spooks in me, understandably. So, I guess I was a little jumpy when I emerged from the darkness and into the alley. I looked up and down just to see if any of the neighborhood kids were back here, and the alley was completely unoccupied from both ends. I walked past the 3 back gardens that led to my own. When I reached mine, I tried to unlatch the gate, but the metal hook had gotten rusted or stuck somehow since the last time I used it. I was reaching over the fence, trying to work out why it wouldn't come unhooked when I felt rough, pinching fingers on my arm. I spun around and came face to face with an ancient-looking man. He wasn't tone of those kindly, pleasant-looking old folks. This guy had a mean, spiteful look in his eyes. He had dirty whisker sprouting from his chin and wiry white hair that had yellowed with tobacco discoloration at the temples. In memory, his irises were non-existent, just huge black pupils swimming in his caras. Tufts of hair grew from his nostrils, and his big ears protruded in a way that almost made me laugh. It was hard to laugh with his tight, vicious grip on my arm, though the man absolutely stank, too, of dampness and just body odor. I tried to pull away, but his fingernails dug into my arm. He asked me what the hell I was doing, snooping back here. I told him I lived here, and he spat out that he thought I was a liar. And when he talked, I saw his teeth weren't just yellow, they were brown, black, or even missing. His breath stank of death, and that's the best I can describe it. My mind immediately went back to the graffiti that I just seen. Arthur ate his kids, and this guy certainly smelled like he'd eaten a kid or two in his day. The old man tugged on my arm again, hard, and Madame Wessie in pain. He called me a liar and a thief and said he'd turn me into the authorities. He told me that I had to come with him so I wouldn't run away. I've been warned by my parents and teachers about what dirty, stinky old men could do to young boys, even ones as old as 8. So, there was absolutely no way that I was letting him take me anywhere. Besides, even if he was telling the truth and he was going to hand me over to the quote-unquote authorities. I hadn't done anything wrong. The alleyway was public, and the house I was going into was mine. I did the only thing I could think to do. Pulled myself